Hello, fellow students, and welcome to IGCSE Genius, a channel where we talk all things IGCSE, resources, tips, and how to get that A star that you deserve. If you do find any of my content useful, please do give it a like so it can reach more people, and also share it to your friends so you can help them out too. The topic of today's video is Coordinated Science Double Award, Chapter B9 of Biology, which is Coordination and Response. I'm going to be explaining all of the contents of this chapter directly from the syllabus. There is going to be no other information except what is required for you to know from the syllabus. So you don't need to worry about learning things that you don't need. This is going to be very exam focused. I've also created detailed notes for this chapter and resources which will be available on my website shortly. If you do want to purchase my notes, please contact me through the email linked down below in the description box. Without further ado, let's get learning. We are now going to move on to the next syllabus section of this chapter, which is B9.2, which is all about sense organs. So in sense organs, the main thing that you need to know about is the eye. This is the main sense organ we learn about at IGCSE. And so this is a very good diagram. I would highly recommend just taking a few minutes right now, pausing the video if you need to look at the diagram and just grasp the main things. Everything that has an arrow to it are stuff that is explicitly mentioned in the syllabus. Anything that doesn't is obviously things that you don't really need to know, but you can know if you want to for more clarity. So for example, the fovea, it's not mentioned, but it's essentially the place where the image is displayed most clearly in the retina. So just things like that, make sure that even though you don't need to know it, just skim over it. So everything in the red arrow is things that you need to know, you must know. It's in the syllabus. Don't forget it. So we have the cornea, the iris, the pupil, the lens, the ciliary muscles, the suspensory ligaments, and obviously the retina back here. Again, just make sure you know which layer is which. And so we know, like for example, from common knowledge, the pupil is the black thing in our eyes. The iris is what gives the eyes color. So whether you have green eyes or blue eyes or brown eyes or black eyes, from the iris. So just try to form connections. And then lastly, the retina is basically where the light is refracted. And the optic nerve is a very important thing to know. It's basically what helps to transfer the whatever light is reflected to the brain for the image. So if you're able to see my face on the screen right now, it is because of those optic nerves. Because those optic nerves are connecting to the brain, you're able to see this diagram, you're able to read the text. So it is quite amazing. And where the optic nerve is where the blind spot is. So essentially, this is the blind spot right here. It's where your eyes can actually see. The human eye can't see that point because it is where the optic nerve connects. So these are the functions of the eye you need to know for coordinated science. It's actually very limited to only this, so it's pretty easy. The cornea is what helps to refract the light into the eye. The iris controls how much light enters the pupil. The lens basically focuses the light onto the retina, so either becomes thin or thick depending on how far you're looking or how near you're looking. The retina contains receptor cells. These are known as cone and rods, and we'll get into these later, but they're basically light-sensitive cells or photoreceptors that help to capture the color and images of what you see. And the optic nerve, lastly, as we said, was what carries impulses to the brain. Okay, now we're coming to the last few things in the sense organ section, and that is the pupil reflex. This is so important. I cannot stress this enough. This comes all the time. It is a IGCSE favorite question to ask, so make sure that you nail this. And this was actually something that I wasn't very confident with when giving the exam. Not even gonna lie, before the exam, I had to review this one more time because it is like one of those things that is very easy to forget, but it's so crucial you remember it. So essentially, this is the pupil reflex. It is a reflex done by the eye in order to protect it from causing damage to the retina. So if too much of a bright light enters your eye, it can sometimes cause your cone cells and your rod cells to get damaged. You can think of this as like when you look into the sun, like right into the sun, it kind of hurts your eyes, and that is because your eyes are not built to withstand that much light. And so the pupil reflex essentially helps to control how much light enters your eye by either becoming kind of dilated and large or contracting and becoming small. Here we have two main muscles at work. We have the circular muscles and the radial muscles. And something that you need to know is they react antagonistically. This basically means that they react oppositely. So if one contracts, the other relaxes, and vice versa. This is a diagram right here to just show you very simply how it works. Dim light, obviously the pupil is enlarged in order to allow as much light to enter so the images can be captured as clearly as possible. And bright light is smaller in order to make sure that too much light doesn't enter the eye. You can easily think about this in the way that humans have lesser vision at night, and that's simply because there is less light. So most of the time our pupils are dilated at night. So, how I remember this was a struggle for me to remember, but I came up with this sort of way to remember it and it worked for me. So either use this or just try to find a way that works for you. So essentially, look at the diagram of a sun. If you look at a sun when it's shining in the day, this is how it looks usually, and during the day obviously it's bright, so the light is bright, and essentially how I think of this is when the sun is shining like this, the circular muscles, which is like the circle part of the sun, is contracting because it's like one shiny globe, one shiny ball here. So it's like very much shining, it's contracting, and at this point we can see the radial muscles are the ones that are like spread out throughout the sides here, like 1, 2, 3, all these rays, they're kind of spread out. So we can say that they're relaxing. So in this case, the circular muscles are contracting and the radial muscles are spread out and are relaxing, and hence this is what happens in bright light. In bright light, the circular muscles contract and the radial muscles relax. Now we're going to move on to dim light. Similarly, how I imagine this is when the sun is setting. When the sun is setting, a lot of the times it becomes in the shape of the moon as it's preparing to go to night. So in these two pictures, you guys can see either look at it as the moon or the sun setting. Basically, things are becoming dim. The light is becoming darker. So this is how the pupil reacts in dark light. And essentially, it'll be the opposite of bright light. So in this case, the circular muscles relax and the radial muscles contract. And how I think of this is obviously the sun is sort of becoming smaller. It's contracting. The rays are all like coming down, right? So the rays are coming together, and that's the rays in this case is the radial muscles coming together, and the circular muscles relax, where they just spread and look like a circle. So this is obviously the way I remember it. Obviously you don't need to, but I'd highly urge you pause the video right now and look at these two images, which are from Save My Exams, which is a great resource, by the way. But basically you can see there's dim light and bright light, and this is the diagram. This is the main thing, the main gist of it, I guess you could say. So pause the video, highly recommend, go through these and just make sure that you get it, you know it, find a way to remember them, whether it's through like a mnemonic or like how I did through like a metaphor. Just whatever you do, just make sure you remember it. Last thing we have in sense organs is to explain accommodation. So accommodation is basically what is done in order to view objects of different distances. So view a far object and a near object. So here, for example, when you're reading a book, accommodation occurs in order to help your eyes focus onto those pages. Whereas if you're looking at a city view that's very far, your eyes will accordingly accommodate in order to view far objects. So in these two scenarios, your lens and your suspensory ligaments and ciliary muscles, they will all be in a different state. So now I'm going to explain this in more detail. So when you're viewing something near, your lens becomes fatter, so it becomes thicker. The suspensory ligaments slacken or become loose, and the ciliary muscles contract. Below I have a diagram here. You can look at this diagram. Honestly, I don't think it's that helpful. Instead, I think just remembering this through some sort of imagery is a lot more useful. So if you think about it, your lens becomes fatter when you need to view something more near. Your suspensory ligaments hence become loose, because if your lens needs to be fat, your suspensory ligaments don't really need to pull on anything, and then your ciliary muscles contract. This is just because the ciliary muscles are these little fat things here. If you remember from the previous diagram, from this diagram, you know the ciliary muscles are these fat things, and the suspensory ligaments are these thin like wires looking things. So you can see the suspensory ligaments in this case don't have to do anything. The ciliary muscles are the ones that have to contract to sort of push in the lens and make it fat, make it thicker. So that is how I remember it. And so that's what I use. Or you can, of course, look at the diagram and try to understand that way, whatever works for you. Now we're going to move on to viewing something far. So basically the opposite of everything that I just said. The lens becomes thinner, so the lens becomes flatter, stretched out. And because the lens is being stretched out, the suspensory ligaments will have to contract. They'll have to become tight in order to sort of pull on the lens, if you can imagine that, in order to make it thinner. And in this case, the ciliary muscles can just relax because they don't need to push anything in or make anything thicker. Now, this is a bit challenging to remember for a lot of students, and I can understand that. So how I made it a little bit easier is by sort of imagining, so let's just think about this hypothetical situation. Think about a fat person, a person who's obese, a person who's fat. They are not happy with their health. They want to become thinner in this case. At the current stage they are, or maybe you could say in the near stage they are, the stage they're close to, the stage they most resonate with, they're fat. So the lens is fat when you view near objects. And in a future stage or in a far stage, you can see that the lens would be thinner because they want to be thin. So the future stage, when they look into the distance, I guess is how I imagined it, they want to be thin. So the lens becomes thinner to view far objects. This is just how I remember it. Obviously, you can find your own way, but this way seemed to help me quite a bit. Lastly, we're going to be talking about cones and rods. So these are two types of photoreceptor cells in the retina. So the rods are basically the cells that are sensitive to dim light. So this is what basically helps us view things in dim light at night. And the cone cells are what help us distinguish between the different colors in bright light. So for example, blue, red, pink, all of that kind of stuff. The cone cells help us to differentiate all of these different bright colors. Okay guys, that is all I have for the chapter coordination and response. Subscribe to my YouTube channel for more IGCSE content.